Guys, my name is Anthony, and I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how to set up and configure Parse-Stack for your Parse Server instance. If you don't quite know, Parse is an open source application server which makes it easy to build web and mobile applications. It's written in Node.js, has a MongoDB database. It was open sourced by Facebook. And Parse-Stack is the Ruby client library for Parse Server. Now it does more than just do the REST API. It also acts as an ORM, similar to what ActiveRecord does for Rails and for databases. This maps, Parse-Stack maps Ruby classes to your parse collections and each record, in your collection. But it also supports all the other features of Parse Server. It supports Cloud Code Webhooks and rack applications, push notifications, file uploading, all that good stuff. But we'll cover that in a future video. So to get started, I've created a directory here called tutorial, and I've created a few files just to save me some typing. The first file I've created is a gem file, which is where we manage our dependencies, and all we've done is just set up Parse-Stack as a dependency. And then to do that, what we do is to install Parse-Stack. You can either do gem install Parse-Stack for any general purpose installation that you just kind of want to try out, but because we're using a gem file, we're going to use bundle. So bundle will make sure it installs Parse-Stack and any other dependencies that you may have. And as you can see, it installed Parse-Stack, and we're using 164 so far. So that's step one. Step two is the way I'm going to show you how Parse-Stack works is through the IRB terminal. Basically, just some interactive stuff. So I've created a loader script here. And the first part of the loader script, I've just written the require for bundler, which you've seen this in many other rack applications, Rails applications. All it does is it takes all of my dependencies from the gem file and makes sure it requires them so they're available to me when I load the script. And then the second part will be actually our connection to our Parse server. Now, the way to connect Parse-Stack to the Parse server is you need three things. You need a server URL, you need an app ID, and you need the REST API key. Now, I already have a Parse server running locally on my machine, and if I can tell you where, it's right here. It's a localhost 1337/parse is the mount point. I'm running version 2.3.1 as of this video. So I can come here, and that's where you put in your server URL. So again, localhost 1337/parse. I have my API, my app ID that I've configured that server running locally, and my REST API key that I've configured locally. So with those two things, I can actually run IRB-R. I'm going to just require the script, and all it does is it takes this script file and just loads it without me having to type this code in the actual terminal. So hitting enter will load the script and throw me into the IRB console. So from here, I'm now able to actually do some types of commands. So looking at our Parse server, that looks pretty good. We can test it out by doing parse.client server health, which is an API available to the open source Parse server to see if it's up. It should return true. Perfect. So everything seems to be working pretty well. Now, normally you wouldn't do this in a production environment. You would actually set these keys up in your env, and we will do that. I have an .env file here, so that'll help me mimic the fact that these parameters are going to be loaded in the environment whenever I launch my API or my application server. So I have a parse app ID here, I have a parse REST API key, and the way we're going to load them is through a utility called .env. So I'm going to go back to my gem file here, and I'm going to add my dependency of gem.env, which means I have to come back to the terminal and just do a bundle to make sure it gets installed. And .env should be up here, got installed properly. So I can go back to my script and now do .env load, which will load all of these parameters into my env hash. So here the first one is parse app ID. That. And my second one is parse REST API key. So I'm going to come here and do env parse REST API key. Okay, and now if I run it again, let's try it again with the IRB. We're going to load it, and we're going to test out to make sure we're still connected to the server. and it says true. Now to actually do something interesting with our connection to our Parse server. Looking at our database, we have no users, but we can actually definitely create a new user. So let's go here and let's see. All of these classes on the left, installation, product, role, session, and user, they're considered core classes to the Parse server. These are available under the Parse namespace in Parse-Stack. So Parse user maps to Parse user, for example. And I can actually perform some queries or requests to this. So I can actually count how many users we have. Well, we have 0 users, right? And that totally makes sense. So maybe what we should do is create our first user, right? So we basically want to sign up a new user. So what we'll do, we'll sign up a new user, call parse user sign up, and we'll give the username Prasad, and maybe a really awesome password of 1234. So we'll sign up our first user. Perfect. So seems like it worked out well. If we go back to our dashboard and we refresh, oops, sorry, we're here on the user side. Now we have now one user, and that user's username is Prasad. So that's great. So now if I do parse user count, now we have one user in the database. Well, that sounds great. So how about I query for that user? So I can do user equals parse user. How about first? And we'll discuss the query format more in the future, but just to kind of show you that everything's working, I'm going to basically set a new variable, and I'm going to query for the first parse user whose username field matches exactly Prasad. So if we do that, we actually got a response. Perfect. So we do user, username, user ID. It's this object ID, and you can see it was set to that object ID. That's perfect. I can even log in with this user. We know its password. So we do login. We know it's super secret password of 1234. And now the good part about that person's logged in, which means they also have a session token. And as you can see, it was set to 1 before. If we refresh this guy, now there's 2 sessions. So it seems everything's working fine. If you have questions on what's happening underneath the hood, you can always do parse.logging equals debug, the symbol debug. And if I do my queries again, you will now see exactly the REST API and response that was exchanged between the server and the client. So there I made my parse user first. We're basically making this query. Here's some keys that we're sending over, the body of the request, and then which there's no body in the GET request, and then the response. Well, I hope this served as a quick introduction on how to set up Parse-Stack in your Ruby application. In the next video, we'll probably cover on how to create your custom classes, or when you're working, if you already have a Parse server application and you want to basically have that available to you in Ruby, so you can actually access those attributes. We'll cover that in the next video. And as always, you can check out all the documentation in Parse-Stack here in the GitHub page or in the API docs, which is pretty well documented. Thanks.